And welcome back, everybody, to Summer with the Stars, Episode 4. And today we are joined by the all-time leader in games played in about 100 other categories in Texas Stars franchise history. Colton Sceviour joins us from a very rainy Red Deer, Alberta. Colton, first of all, thanks so much for joining us here during your off-season. But you and I were just talking before we started the recording just how much damage nature has been giving the central part of Alberta, particularly Calgary, but you guys are only about 90 miles, or in Canadian speak, 150 kilometers north of Calgary. What has it been like the last week or so of dealing with just incredible rain and flooding up in Alberta?
Yeah, I mean, it's been insane. And we've had a fair amount of rain here. It's been wet, but it was nothing of that magnitude. And then, I mean, being so close, you obviously know a lot of people that live there and stuff like that. So it was crazy seeing the up close video and the pictures and sort of that of areas that, I mean, you've been to and you recognize, and you're seeing it, 5-10 feet underwater in certain areas, and it was crazy and surreal for sure.
I was reading an article that said that Red Deer dodged a bullet because the river, which is coincidentally named the Red Deer River, crested before it got to the above flood walls, and that pretty much saved any major damage. Was there any point when you were watching this whole thing unfold where you or anybody else in the city got a little nervous about it?
I think the way it kind of developed, we kind of slowly started hearing about the areas getting hit and stuff like that, but we never got too much as far as the river getting too high. A lot of the water came from dams being opened to try and relieve some of the flooding in other areas. I think that's where a lot of the water that we got dealt with came, but at the same time, it barely got over. Like, the river's at an all-time high, and there's like hiking path or like walking paths and like bike paths around the river that are a little bit underwater. But like, as far as like housing and buildings and that kind of stuff, as far as I know, it avoided almost all the buildings and stuff like that, and avoided any major damage in that.
Well, it's certainly lucky, because you and I were talking before we started about Calgary and the devastation that they had, and they weren't even the worst of it. You mentioned a part of Alberta called High River, which unfortunately is fairly appropriately named for the damage. But just talking about the Calgary Flames home building, the Saddle Dome, they were pretty close to losing the whole thing, you tell me, and I didn't know that. I know that they had a lot of damage there, but I didn't realize how close it was to that building being completely condemned.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly how like the exact stats on it were and stuff like that, but the rumblings were if it got a few more rows higher, that building may not have been able to be saved, just because it would have wiped out would have affected the entire concourse, concession and all the suites and everything would have been toast. And at that point, you're looking at basically having to rebuild that building from the ground up, because you really have nothing to salvage at that point except the frame. And that's kind of what it sounded like here. It managed to stop before that got to that point, and it sounds like they seem to think they're going to be able to get it back in time for the WHL and NHL seasons to start. But I mean, it's going to take a lot of work for sure after seeing some of those pictures of the inside of that building.
Now, I know that Red Deer is about halfway between Calgary and Edmonton. I didn't realize that it was the third largest city in Alberta. I've never been there. You're one of multiple Texas Stars players from Red Deer, along with Matt Fraser and Bretton Cameron from this past year. Obviously, we have more than just those three Alberta natives. But tell me a little bit about what a kind of city Red Deer's like, because I think a lot of people hear about major Canadian cities that have NHL teams or ones that are otherwise, and think of metropolitan areas and then think everything else is just farmland. Red Deer is actually a pretty large town, it sounds like.
Pretty large city, you mean, not town. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty big. I mean, it's the third largest, but I mean, all of the size is based on the location for sure. The fact that we're halfway between Calgary and Edmonton, I think it makes it a good place for a lot of people to live as far as working and stuff like that, because it is, it is a cheaper place to live than, say, in Edmonton or Calgary, because it's not as large. But I mean, the assumption that it's mostly farmland outside of the major metropolitans, I mean, it may not be deadly true, but it's not that far off either. There is for the amount of population, for the amount of size, there's a lot of farmland in small cities and little small towns and stuff like that incorporate around the province.
Because you've played with Matt Fraser for 2 years and Bretton Cameron this past year, how did you know each other growing up Was that something that you obviously you probably know most of the hockey players that played in that area?
Yeah, I knew Matt from before. We grew up in the same, like I guess you'd say, same subdivision kind of thing. Went to the same elementary school, middle school, and high school, but had never played hockey together until Texas, which is kind of strange. And then I've known Breton for a long time too. Actually, I knew him since we were probably 12 years old. Whatever. We played summer hockey together a little bit, and then I played against him forever. And he's not originally from here. It's where he lives now, but he's from a smaller town, basically about halfway between here and Calgary, actually.
Now,
But,
you guys,
oh.
did you? I think you told me. Did you guys actually drive home together this summer?
Yeah. No, at the end of the season, he hopped in my truck with me, and we did the drive together. Yeah, we'd known each other for years, and we're actually really good friends. So when he got called up, I was actually probably more excited than he was about that. And I mean, it worked out well for him too. I mean, he knew a lot of guys on the team coming up, which was nice. Like with me and Matt, and he played hockey with Coyle, and Baldwin was there at the time, and those kind of guys. So he knew a lot of the guys actually coming in, which was definitely a good thing for him.
What's it like to have guys like that, like a Cameron or Fraser, who you knew as kids, now to be able to share the pro stage and the AHL level, which is obviously a pretty elite level of hockey? Is it pretty special to be able to share it with guys you know from such a long time ago?
I mean, yeah, it's cool. Anytime you get to play hockey with someone that you knew when you're younger, or grew up with, or were friends with, whatever, it's always a fun experience for sure. And the fact of having 3 people on the same American Hockey League team from a small, I guess not a small city, but I mean not huge by any means. And then there's only a handful of guys around our age playing pro even, and the fact that 3 of us are in the same city for that long is pretty cool for sure.
Now, you and Breton were in a car together, a truck together for how long? How long did it take for you guys to drive from Austin to Alberta?
I think it ended up being like 33 hours
Oh.
or something like that of driving time. That doesn't include the time spent sleeping.
Hopefully not both at the same time.
Well, no, that was usually yeah in hotels. I mean, we're sleeping and driving too much. We just figured we'd take it easy.
So it's not the first time you've made that trek, but that's got to be taking you probably 2 or 3 days at least. Do you enjoy that trip? The twice annual trip that you've done for the last few years from Red Deer down to Texas.
I wouldn't say I enjoy it, but I mean I don't hate it either. I mean I usually do it by myself. I think of the 8 times I've made the trip, I've had someone with me only for 3 of them. So a lot of the times I've just done it by myself, and I kind of just zone out and turn music up loud and do it. But it's definitely more enjoyable when there's someone else in the car to drive at times and just to talk to you, so you don't go insane talking to yourself.
Are you you're by yourself? You got the music going. Are you singing along, or are you just going to kind of quietly let it permeate your ears?
I guess it depends on what's playing. I'm sure there's some times where I probably get a little stir crazy and singing louder than I should for a car full of one person. But it's whatever it takes to make time go a little faster, I guess.
I want to give you a quick congratulations because last week the Dallas Stars announced you signed a new 1-year 2A deal with Dallas. Obviously, congratulations on that. Can you tell us a little bit about the contract process, because you were a restricted free agent this year?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know exactly how much there is to describe. It's a pretty similar concept when you're restricted, because as far as options and like the way it goes, it's pretty standard. So it's usually a pretty quick process. You hear about some of the contract signings dragging out for a while and stuff like that, but generally with restricted guys at the American Hockey League level, the deals are done relatively quickly, and it was good. I was glad to get it done out of the way early. It's always, you always assume you're going to be back, but you never know for sure. So it's always good, to have that contract done, so you can just focus on training and getting ready for the next season, as opposed to having to worry about where you're going or where you might end up.
Now, obviously, there could have been a little bit of uncertainty there because of the fact with the changes in Dallas, with Jim Nill coming in as the new general manager, and just this week we heard the announcement that Lindy Ruff will be the new head coach. I want to get your thoughts on the new GM first. The fact that he did so that they made the change before the season ended, and you were able to play and in front of him, especially in the playoffs with Texas. Do you think that was beneficial? And then obviously having the exit meetings with him, it wasn't as though this change happened and there was complete uncertainty?
I mean, yeah, I think it helps us. I think it definitely helps him too. I mean, coming into a new organization, you never know how much he's watched us or how much he's seen certain guys and stuff like that. So I think from both perspectives, it was huge just because you were able to see exactly kind of he was able to find out what he had and gave him an idea coming into the summer about signings and stuff like that. And it gave us a chance to it gave everyone Austin a chance to prove themselves and show them what kind of player they were and all that kind of stuff. So I think it worked out well. Having an exit meeting with him was huge as a player because you learn like where he sits, what kind of stuff he wants to see in a training camp from you, and it gives you an idea as opposed to kind of going in and just doing your thing. You definitely have more of a goal or something to aim towards for sure once you've been able to talk to a guy.
Well, this past year you got into your second NHL game of your career. January 26th was the game. It was against St. Louis, and you picked up a point on a goal by Ryan Garbett in the third period. Your first in your NHL career. It was an assist. I know it was only a second assist, but it was part of a key play. I remember that you kept that alive. You got it to Brendan Morrow, who ended up finding Garbett for the goal. Were you pretty excited, even though that was a losing game, to be able to get that first point out of the way?
I mean, it was definitely a cool feeling. Just getting into games is fun. Anytime you can add a point of any sort, early on, it's always a cool feeling for sure. I mean, it was tough, definitely. Saying the fact that it was a loss, and when you are there, being in the kind of the side role that you play at that level, you want the team to win. It's more of a team thing than anything else, but it's definitely a cool feeling when you get that first point.
Now, I know that you're probably feeling as though you're right on the cusp of the sort of AHL NHL divide. You've played 2 games now, 1 in each of the last 2 seasons with Dallas. You've clearly played plenty of AHL games, and we'll get to some of your stats in a moment, but where do you feel that your summer training / training camp is headed? Because you're kind of in a big moment here. You have a new head coach in Dallas, obviously the new GM we talked about. It kind of could work both ways because you had great experiences with 2 years under Glenn Gulletson, so having him in the NHL couldn't hurt because he certainly knew a lot about you and the kind of player you were. But on the other hand, you get a clean slate with Lindy Ruff coming in. You feel as though you have a great chance to go in and, if you have a good camp, have some fresh eyes to give you a new perspective?
I mean, yeah. I mean, anytime you get there's a new coach or a new GM or anything like that, the first training camp's always huge, right? It's kind of a first impression thing. I mean, Jim Nill was obviously lucky enough, or was obviously fortunate enough to get that job at the point where he's able to watch, our entire team there for a while. So he has, he's seen pieces and knows what guys have. But at the same time, that first training camp, the first time you go next with NHL players and that kind of stuff, that's your chance to show what you can do to him, as well as with Lindy Ruff there as a new coach. It gives you a chance to kind of prove yourself, and it gives you a fresh slate to start with. And it's an exciting feeling for sure, but it's also nerve-wracking knowing that everything you've done in the past, as much as it's there, it doesn't really mean much because those guys haven't seen it up close. So it's an exciting time, and it definitely makes for a summer where you want to come in the best possible shape and be able to prove yourself. But it's definitely an opportunity for sure.
Now, you talk about the summer of getting yourself ready. Can you shed any light in terms of how you felt for those last playoff games, in terms of physically? Because we've heard lots of things about players playing through some injuries and being banged up during the course of the postseason run. You're a guy that only missed 5 games in the first 3 years of your pro career, and you and I did a discussion about that during the season, about missing the first month because of a fluke injury during the first period of a preseason game this past year, and that made you miss more time than you'd ever missed in your career. But what was your physical condition like that month of May when you were trying to get by the Oklahoma City Barons?
I mean, I think when you get to that point of the season, no one really feels, proper, I guess. There's always little naggy things going on and sort of that, and it's just part of it. When you get, after playing, the regular season for that long, and then, that first playoff series against Milwaukee is as tough as it was physically. There's always little nicks and bruises and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's part of it. It was there a little bit for sure, I think, but I think it was there. Everyone obviously was feeling something. It was just that it's that time of year. That's kind of how it is. And I mean, the having the first few weeks off after the regular season was huge for that, just to be able to rest up and just kind of get your body back to feeling normal again. I guess for the first little bit before you started training was. I mean, it was definitely a much needed break when it all came down to it.
Your whole line with Morin and Frazier were all, as well as yourself, all had something that they were trying to play through. Do you feel as though, I mean, there's no doubt that you guys had the absolute, as not 100% effort that you could try to work through it, but did you have any feeling as though if you guys were healthier that there would have been a little bit more you could have brought in?
I mean, you always think that when lose the situation, you're always thinking what if, or maybe you could have and stuff like that. And I mean, it maybe was possible, but at the same time, they were banged up too, and you add in that you maybe if they're all healthy too, and you're all healthy, I mean, you never know which way the series is going to go and stuff like that. But it's part of the way the playoffs always are, right? As much as it's the best team, it's also the team that manages to stay the healthiest. You always see teams that do well because they don't have to. They have to stay dressed the same lineup or as similar to the lineup as possible through the entire playoffs, and it always helps, right? So injuries are obviously have a big effect on anyone's playoff run. Everyone would like to go into the playoffs 100% healthy and 100% feeling their best, but unfortunately, that's an unrealistic goal after a 70-game regular season.
Now, you actually had a great, very interesting perspective during our post-playoff sort of exit media interviews that we did. You were one of the players we brought in to talk to our writers, and the interesting thing you commented was the fact that it was refreshing for this team last year, even though it was bitterly disappointing to not go farther in the playoffs, to have gotten back to the playoffs after the first year ever of the team not making it, win the division for the first time, be the top seed in the Western Conference, win that first playoff series since the 2010 playoff run. Obviously, there were a lot of good things to go forward. Do you kind of keep that more of a positive light, or is there still a little bit of that unfulfilled feeling out there?
I mean, you obviously got a bit of a chip on your shoulder, when you see the, someone else that's not you, holding the Calder Cup identity. Because that's obviously going into that playoff. That's what we thought was going to be us, and we thought we were the team that was going to win that. And it was definitely a little bit of bitterness there because you wanted to be that team, but at the same time, it's a start right after the way a couple of years ago. I hadn't won a playoff series since my first year pro. To be at one win and kind of figure that much out. And if you look at it now with all the signings and the way Dallas is going, it looks like our team is going to be eerily similar to the one this past season. So I mean, even if it is only a one series playoff win, but the fact that we kind of learned how to win in the regular season for sure, and bringing a lot of those same guys back, it definitely builds towards a chance that we can do this again next year as well.
Well, it's an interesting thought you brought up because I know that you're going to be trying as hard as you can to make the Dallas Stars lineup, and we certainly are pulling for you and all the other guys here that played for the Stars last year. But thinking if that the situation brings you to Texas for your fifth season, you have a returning head coach, Willie Desjardins, who had a very successful first year as a head coach, his first time in the AHL as a head coach. You have a lot of players, as you mentioned. Morin signs a new 2-year contract. Yourself, Frazier, Gauntz, Connaughton. The list goes on and on. With all the young guys, the rookies that have started to mature into their second or even now into their third year pro, you feeling as though that there's going to be a heck of a balanced team that now has that playoff experience again, getting ready for next year for Texas?
I mean, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you obviously never know what's going to happen as far as what the roster in Dallas is going to look like. But I mean, you always see. I mean, most teams there's a lot of change from year to year, especially at the AHL level, just with guys signing with different teams or getting traded or going up and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like anytime if the team you do happen to have in the AHL can be similar to the one you had the year before, you're coming in with a better feeling than having to feel yourself out like you usually do at the beginning of the year. It definitely helps. If next year's team is closer to this year's team or as close to this year's team as possible, it's obviously going to help us right off the bat for sure.
You're the only player in Texas Stars history to wear number 7. You're also the franchise leader. I'm going to give you a few stats here. Franchise leader in games played, plus minus, shorthanded goals, game-winning goals, shots, shootout goals, and shootout attempts. I don't know if that one is as exciting. And penalty shot goals. You're also the number 2 in points, assists, and then it goes on and on and on. What's that all mean to you? I mean, how dear to your heart is the Texas Stars franchise?
I mean, it's obviously pretty cool, just to even have any kind of thing like that, at any point in time. I mean, it's obviously gonna look that way considering I've played there since the organization existed, which is gonna help in a lot of those situations, and played a lot of games every year. But I mean, it's cool. I mean, it's the only team I've played for in my pro career. I've had 2 games in Dallas, but other than that, every other game I've played pro has been in a Texas Stars uniform. So it's kind of cool. It's definitely something that it's an honor to have those kind of things. But at the same time, as nice as that is, you always want to be wearing the Dallas Stars jersey at the end. That's kind of the ultimate goal.
Well, speaking of the NHL, your dad was actually drafted by the Stanley Cup champion Chicago Blackhawks, 5th round of the 1984 draft, played the 86-87 season with them, had a pretty good pro career in a number of different ways. I think he also played for Team Canada internationally. You're obviously tied in with the Stars organization for a while now. Did he have any rooting interest for the Blackhawks in the finals against Boston?
No, he watches the game differently. He doesn't watch the game as a fan. He watches it as a coach and as a scout. I mean, that's what he's done for years. He's always coached me growing up, and he said he does a lot of scouting now for my old junior team and stuff. So when he watches the games, he doesn't watch them as a fan. He watches it from a X and O perspective a little bit more, and systems wise, and that aspect of it a little bit. So it's a little different for him, I think, just the way he watches games.
So it's a completely different perspective because, from a player's perspective, you're still a fan. I would imagine that you watched some of those games and still got pretty into it.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Well, I mean, that doesn't matter what team you play for and stuff like that. I mean, if you watch the Stanley Cup, being raised or whatever, it always gives you chills. It's always one of those things. It always seems like maybe like you always think maybe one day that could be me and that kind of stuff, and you definitely get it. You definitely get into it. That's for sure.
You played against a lot of those players that played for the Rockford Ice Hogs and that have graduated to the Blackhawks. Does that give you a little bit more of that inkling of maybe someday for me?
I mean, yeah. I mean, every year someone wins the Stanley. Every year they win the Stanley Cup. There's always a handful of players, or more than a handful of players on that winning team that at one point played in the AHL, whether it was for that team's farm team or for another team's. But I mean, you realize you're in reality just one step away from being on one of those teams. It's a cool feeling when you watch it get raised. You realize, just how close you are, but how much work is still there to get to that point.
Do you feel the same way from last year's playoff run, that you felt that team being the Western Conference top seed was pretty close, and yet 2 rounds short, and you obviously feel like it was still really far away?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things, right? Like you feel like you're right there, but at the same time, the difference between being right there and being there, it's not just a little thing. There's a lot of work between each round and each level and all that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, as much as it was cool to be there and we made it to the second round or whatever, at the same time, like the finals isn't that far away, but it takes a lot of work to get there. That's for sure.
Well, you mentioned it back in the 2010 finals. You guys went all the way to the finals against Hershey. You had to win 2 after sweeping Rockford in the first round. Had to win 2 7-game series against Chicago and Hamilton just to get to the finals. So you've tasted it. You actually won 2 games in Hershey, took the lead in game 3, and I think people, I've heard from numerous accounts that people were starting in their heads to calculate their ring size. You talk about how close you were to a Calder Cup and yet so far away. What was that playoff series like? The whole 2010 playoffs had to be, as a rookie, had to be amazing. But particularly that finals against Hershey, was that one of the most amazing experiences in your pro career?
I mean, it was all a blur. A lot of that first year, just being the fact that it was my first year pro, it was, as much as I learned from it, there's a lot of stuff I think I missed on because I didn't realize at the time what it was. You know what I mean? Like, being my first year, I didn't realize exactly what it took to get to those things and do all that stuff. Then after a couple of years, you kind of realize exactly what was accomplished that year, and you kind of looking back, you realize how crazy and how close that was. I mean, in that playoffs, we won 2 Game 7s on the road just to stay alive. One of them in overtime, and then that finals was just such a close series. Like, we won those first 2 games, but they were like, we barely. You know, I mean, it could have been any team could have won, and then we lost the next 4. And the only game that was really even, I mean, it was really spread out much, was the game 6, the clinching game, that when they beat us. Rather than that, every game was 1 goal and stuff like that. So look back on it, and you definitely learn a lot. But I've had more appreciation for it as I've played more games in the league.
And obviously, I'm sure the same with not making the playoffs after the 11-12 season. Going forward now, just thinking about the offseason here, because we could talk to you all day. What kind of things do you like to do that you can now during the summer that you just can't do when you're in the middle of a season?
Relax. Like, it's as much like I can kind of stop thinking about hockey a little bit more than, like, during the regular season. It's always in your mind, and you're at the rink every day. And I mean, the one nice thing is just mentally you get a rest and you get a break from, you know, just the everyday grind of whatever's going on at that time of the season, whether it's success or failures or whatever. You get a break from that, and that's huge. And then I get to golf a lot in the summer too, which during the season I don't ever do. So those are the 2 things I think are the best parts about summer for sure, as far as unwinding and relaxing before the next season.
And I'm guessing, although I've never been up to Red Deer, that you probably are avoiding 100 degrees or higher during the summer months.
Yeah, no. I think today is one of the nicer days we've had since I've been back, and I think the high is 75.
Oh wow!
It's more like 65, 70, and that's about it. If it was 100, I would be golfing never. I'd be in my house with my air conditioning on, or sitting neck deep in a pool, I think.
Clearly enjoying the cooler months of Texas during hockey season, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I like the weather there. I pretty much get the same weather for 12 months. I get basically the winters and the spring through. Well, the winter kind of weather in Texas is closer to the summer weather here than the summer weather down there is. So it's about a year of, I only see the weather fluctuate about 20 degrees as opposed to the 60 or 70 or 80 or whatever it does if I spent the whole summer in Red Deer.
And obviously you don't miss too many snowfalls except for a couple of road trips during the season.
Yeah, well, the snowfalls down there are different than up here. It's just colder. Like, the snow, you got the snow, but it's, for whatever reason, it just seems colder up here than it does when we're even in, like, out east or in, like, Chicago and those areas. When you get up here, there's some days in the winter that are just, like, crippling cold, and I don't miss those ones one bit.
What's the coldest in your entire life in Red Deer that you've ever experienced? Coldest temperature?
I think it was minus 45.
Oh.
That's Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit.
I think at that point it doesn't matter. It's just cold.
Yeah, again, there was one winter when I was younger. We got to, like, it was minus 40 or minus 45 with wind chill, and, like, there was some of the schools weren't going because the buses wouldn't start. Like, you actually couldn't get vehicles wouldn't, like, work. So that. I don't remember much about it. I just remember the number, and I remember not ever wanting to be there for that number again.
I can imagine. Well, Colton, so glad to have you on. Congratulations again on signing your new deal with the Dallas Stars. And obviously, we're hoping for your best for training camp up in Dallas, but if not, Texas Stars fans very excited to have you for the upcoming 2013-14 season. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you very much.
Colton Sceviour joining us here for Summer with the Stars, Episode 4, and we will be back next week with another interview. So long, everyone.